know you did it! Those tools prove everything, you monster!
The first time I saw the cabin, the warning sign wasn't the thing that stopped me. What stopped me was the silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's been collecting dust for decades. The place sat at the end of a cracked gravel lane, swallowed by pine trees and wild vines, like the forest had finally decided, fine, we'll take it back. The windows were dark holes. The porch sagged like a tired spine, and yet the land around it felt expensive wide, private, and strangely untouched. I remember whispering, "You're still here," like the house could hear me. I found it by accident, one of those late-night scrolling sessions when you're half asleep and telling yourself you're just looking. The listing said, 150-year-old cabin estate, abandoned, as is, cash preferred. The price was suspiciously low for the acreage. The photos were worse than the description. Collapsed shed, roof damage, weeds taller than a person. But the map pin showed something that made my heart pick up speed. A creek line, a small orchard, and what looked like an old stone wall tracing part of the property boundary. I zoomed in and thought, if I don't look at this in person, I'll regret it forever. The real estate agent met me at a rusted gate and didn't even try to hide his doubt. He said, "Before you fall in love, I'm going to say this once. It's not an easy property." I asked what that meant. He rubbed his neck and said, "It's been abandoned for years. Lots of rumors. And there's an HOA nearby." I laughed because that sounded ridiculous. An AO near a 150-year-old cabin in the woods. He didn't laugh back. "They've taken an interest," he said carefully. That was the first time I felt a small chill, like the place came with a shadow. Up close, it was worse and better. The front door hung crooked, but the hand-hewn beams inside were stunning. Someone had built this place with patience, not power tools. The stone fireplace was blackened with old soot, and the mantel had carvings, simple shapes, maybe initials. The floors creaked in a way that didn't feel dangerous, just ancient. A family of birds had made a home in the rafters. The air smelled like wet wood and thyme. I stepped into what used to be a kitchen and saw faded wallpaper with tiny blue flowers. And that's when I pictured it. Lit candles, laughter, snow outside, someone stirring soup. I wasn't shopping for a flip. I wasn't chasing some social media cabin aesthetic. I wanted a place with a story because my own life had been moving too fast. Work, noise, screens, deadlines. I wanted something that demanded patience. Something real. Standing there, I realized this wasn't just a property. It was a project that could swallow me whole or save me. I said out loud, "If I buy you, I'm not abandoning you again." And I meant it. But I had no idea the biggest problem wouldn't be rot, mold, or money. It would be people. Behind the cabin, the land opened up. A clearing with an old barn skeleton, a smokehouse, and what looked like a collapsed greenhouse frame. Farther down, the creek curved like a ribbon, and the orchard, half wild, still produced small apples, bitter but alive. There was even a stone-lined well, covered with a warped wooden lid. The agent said, old families used to call it the Mercer place. I asked who Mercer was. He shrugged. Local history. But nobody's lived here in a long time. Tax delinquency. Bank took it, then it just sat. He paused. Until now. On the way out, I noticed a shiny sign nailed to a newer post near the road. Pine Ridge Community Private HOA enforced. That felt wrong. Like a modern sticker slapped onto an antique painting. The agent saw me staring and said, "Their entrance is about half a mile that way." I asked why their sign was on this side of the road. He shrugged again. Shrugging was becoming his main personality. They say they maintain the road. They're territorial. Territorial. That was the word. I drove home with my mind racing, but the cabin's image followed me like a song I couldn't stop humming. The next 2 weeks were less romantic. I ordered a title search. One called the county. I asked about easements, boundary disputes, liens, everything. The cabin property had its own parcel number, its own history, and a chain of ownership going back so far the documents changed handwriting styles. The HOA on paper had nothing to do with it. The access road was the only question mark. There was an old easement recorded decades ago. Legal, documented. My lawyer friend looked it over and said, "You're fine, but expect drama." I laughed. Then I stopped laughing, because people who say, "expect drama," usually know. I offered cash as is with a fast close. Part of me worried someone else would swoop in. Another part of me wondered if I was making a terrible decision. The seller of bank didn't negotiate much. They just wanted it off their books. When the contract was accepted, I sat on my couch and stared at the ceiling, feeling a weird mix of victory and fear. I wasn't just buying a cabin. I was buying responsibility. A century and a half of weather. A mystery. A promise. And somewhere in the background, that HOA sign kept flashing in my mind like a warning light on a dashboard at closing. Everything was normal papers, signatures, routine smiles. But when the deed slid across the table, my hands actually shook. The clerk said, "Congratulations." I said, "Thank you," but my brain was screaming, "What did you just do?" The moment it became official, I drove straight out to the land alone. I parked in the clearing and just listened. Wind in the trees. Creek in the distance. The cabin didn't look happy or sad. It just looked like it had been waiting. I walked to the porch and set my palm on the doorframe. "Okay," I whispered. "We start now." The first day I brought contractor bags, gloves, a mask, and way too much optimism. Inside was a mess-old insulation, animal droppings, broken glass, pieces of roof. I found a rusted bed frame and an ancient cast iron pan half buried in debris. There were beer cans from different decades, like time capsules of bad decisions. But I also found beauty. Hand-forged nails, a child's marble, an oil lamp. I filled bag after bag, sweat soaking through my shirt. By sunset, I'd cleared one room and my back hurt like I'd been hit by a truck. I sat on the porch steps and thought, this is going to take everything I have. On day 3, while I was hauling broken boards to a pile, an older man in a flannel shirt appeared at the edge of the trees like he'd been there the whole time. He raised a hand. "Didn't think anyone would ever work on this place again," he said. His name was Hank, and he lived on the far side of the ridge outside the HOA. He told me he remembered the cabin, when it still had smoke coming out of the chimney. "Good people," he said. Then his face tightened. "But you're gonna have trouble with Pine Ridge." I asked why. Hank spit into the dirt. "They think they own everything that looks pretty." A week later, I heard tires crunching fast on gravel. A white SUV pulled up like it owned the clearing. A woman stepped out wearing spotless sneakers, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of expression that could sour milk. She didn't say hello. She looked past me at the cabin like it was an insult. "Excuse me," she said. "What do you think you're doing?" I wiped sweat off my forehead. "Restoring my property." She laughed one sharp, offended sound. "This is Pine Ridge Common Land. It belongs to the community." I almost thought she was joking. Then she added, "I'm the HOA compliance officer. You need to stop." I told her calmly, "I just bought this parcel. I have the deed." She stepped closer, voice rising. "No, this cabin is part of our heritage trail. People hike here. We maintain the road. We decide what happens." Then she pointed at my trash pile like it was criminal evidence. You can't just come in here and change things. I remember blinking, trying to process the audacity. Ma'am, I said, with respect, I'm not asking permission to repair my house. Her smile was thin and mean. You will, she said, or we'll make this very difficult. I didn't yell. I didn't insult her. I said, if you believe there's a legal issue, you can contact my attorney. That sentence, just that sentence, made her face go stiff. She snapped. We have lawyers, too. Then she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the cabin, my tools, my truck license plate, and me. For the record, she said, this is unauthorized activity. I felt my stomach tighten. Not fear exactly, more like disbelief. She got back into her SUV, spun gravel as she turned around, and left like a storm rolling out. I stood there in the dust and thought, so this is what the agent meant. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my mailing address. It said Pine Ridge. HOA was issuing a cease and desist due to unapproved construction and unauthorized land disturbance on community property. It demanded I stop work immediately and schedule a hearing with their board. The letter sounded confident, like they'd done this before and always won. I forwarded it to my attorney and waited for the reassurance. He called me and said, "This is nonsense. They're bluffing." Then he paused. But bluffing can still cost you time and money. That's when I realized, even if I was right, they could still make my life miserable. I hired a licensed surveyor anyway, because I wanted zero doubt. 2 men showed up with equipment that looked like it belonged on a spaceship and started marking boundaries. It took them 2 days. When they finished, the lead surveyor handed me a map and said, "Your parcel is clean. The cabin, barn, creek, everything you're working on is inside your lines." He tapped the paper. The HOA is nowhere near this boundary, except the access easement. I felt relief wash through me like rain. I took a picture of the survey and sent it to my attorney. Then I did something petty but satisfying. I printed a copy and taped it inside the cabin window. Facing the road. With the survey done, I went full speed. Step 1 was stabilizing the structure foundation supports, temporary bracing, and removing dangerous rot. A restoration carpenter named Luis walked through the cabin slowly, touching beams like he was reading Braille. "This is good wood," he said. "Old growth, strong, worth saving." He explained we'd replace damaged logs carefully, splice where possible, and use period-correct joinery so it wouldn't look like a modern patch job. I love that. If I was going to do this, I wanted the cabin to keep its identity. I wasn't trying to build a shiny new house. I was trying to wake an old one up. When we removed part of the roof, we found the real nightmare years of slow leaks had rotted sections of rafters and attracted insects. It looked like the cabin had been quietly dissolving from the top down. Luis whistled low. "We caught it just in time," he said. We installed temporary tarps, then began replacing rafters one by one. The sound of hammers echoed through the trees like a heartbeat returning. That night I drove home exhausted, but proud. The cabin was no longer abandoned. It was actively being saved. And I knew that fact would make certain people even angrier. A week into roof repairs, the white SUV returned, this time with 2 other people and clipboards. The same woman, let's call her Karen, because honestly, it fits toward the cabin like she was approaching a crime scene. "We're here for an inspection," she announced. I said, "You have no authority here." Karen nodded like I'd said something cute. "If you refuse, we'll report you to the county." One of the clipboard guys added, "The community has standards." I laughed, unable to help it. "This cabin is 150 years old," I said. "Your standards are younger than my floorboards." Karen's face turned red. "Enjoy your little joke," she snapped. "It ends soon." 2 days later, a county code enforcement officer showed up. Not aggressive, just doing his job. He said they'd received a complaint about illegal construction. I walked him through everything. Permits filed, contractor licensed, plans submitted. I showed him the survey. I showed him the deed. He looked around, nodded, and said, "You're fine." Before he left, he said something that stuck with me. Some folks use complaints like weapons. After he drove off, I just stood there, staring at the road. That HOA wasn't trying to protect the community. They were trying to exhaust me. They wanted me to quit. And the worst part? They were confident I would. On a rainy afternoon when work paused, I sat inside the cabin and cleaned the fireplace mantel with a soft brush. Under soot and grime, I found carved letters, EM 1876. Below it, a smaller line, "Home is earned." I don't know why, but that phrase hit me hard. Home isn't just purchased. It's fought for, repaired, maintained, and defended. I took a picture and sent it to Hank, the neighbor. He replied, "Mercer initials." Old story there. That made me curious. If this cabin mattered enough for someone to carve a motto into it nearly 150 years ago, maybe it mattered enough to protect now. I visited the County Historical Society, expecting dusty shelves and a quick dead end. Instead, an archivist got excited when I mentioned the Mercer place. She brought out a folder with newspaper clippings mentions of a small family farm, an orchard, and a cabin used as a stopover during winter storms. The land had once been part of a bigger tract, later divided. I asked about Pine Ridge HOA. She rolled her eyes. "They're newer. Built up in the 1990s, she said. Then she leaned closer. They've tried to claim pieces of surrounding land before. Trails, creek access. Anything that makes their neighborhood feel exclusive. So it wasn't personal. It was a pattern. While cleaning the attic, Weiss called me up. "You need to see this." Under collapsed insulation was a tin box rusted but intact. Inside were brittle documents, a few black and white photos, and a small notebook wrapped in cloth. The photos showed the cabin when it was bright and proud, with a family standing on the porch. The notebook looked like a diary faded ink, careful handwriting. I didn't read it all at once. It felt too intimate. But one line near the front jumped out. "If we leave, they'll take it." I sat back on my heels, suddenly uneasy. Who was they? And why did it feel like history was repeating itself? By month 2, the roof was secure, the structure stabilized, and we had rough electrical plans approved. I camped on the property for the first time, inside the cabin, on a cot. The place smelled less like decay and more like wood again. Wind tapped the new roof. The creek murmured outside. I expected fear or strange noises. Instead, I slept like a rock. In the morning, sunlight came through a cleaned window and landed on the floor like a blessing. I made coffee on a small camp stove and drank it on the porch. That was the first time I felt it. The cabin wasn't just surviving. It was becoming mine. A new letter came, this time an official summons to an HOA board hearing. It claimed I was trespassing on Pine Ridge property and interfering with community easements. The tone was theatrical, like a courtroom drama written by someone who'd watched too many legal shows. My attorney said, "You don't have to attend. You're not in their HOA." But I decided I would attend because I wanted to see what they were really after. Hank told me, "They'll try to intimidate you. Don't go alone." So I didn't. I brought my attorney, my survey, my deed, and a calmness that came from knowing the truth. Their clubhouse was shiny and new stone facade, manicured lawn, fountains. It felt like another universe compared to my muddy boots and sawdust-covered truck. Inside, the board sat behind a long table like judges. Karen sat near the front with a folder thick enough to be a weapon. The board president said, We are here to discuss unauthorized work on community land. My attorney stood and said, "This is not community land." Karen smirked like she'd been waiting for that. "Then prove it," she said. My attorney calmly laid the survey and deed on the table. The room went quiet in a way that felt delicious. Karen leaned over the documents and shook her head dramatically. "Those documents are incorrect," she said. "We have maps showing the cabin parcel was absorbed when Pine Ridge was developed." My attorney asked to see their maps. Karen produced a photocopy that looked like it had been copied 100 times. Blurry lines, no official stamps. My survey had a professional seal and recent measurements. The board members exchanged looks. One asked Karen, "Do we have a recorded document supporting this?" Karen's voice sharpened. "We've always used it as community space." My attorney replied, "Using something doesn't mean you own it." That sentence landed like a hammer. A board member finally admitted the quiet part out loud. "Residents enjoy hiking to that cabin," he said. "It's part of our community identity. If you fence it or restrict access, that affects property values." There it was. Not safety. Not standards. Not heritage. Property values. Karen jumped in. He could turn it into a rental, parties, noise, strangers. I said, or I could restore it responsibly and treat it like a home. Karen laughed. "People like you always say that." My attorney asked the board to confirm whether they had any legal ownership claim. They didn't. They had feelings. And Karen was trying to turn those feelings into law. Even after the documents, the board president leaned back and said, "We may pursue legal action to protect community interests." My attorney nodded politely. "You're free to waste your money," he said. Karen's face hardened. "We're not wasting anything," she snapped. "We'll stop him." We stopped others. That line made my stomach drop. We stopped others. So I wasn't the first person who tried to use this land. I was just the first one who had enough paperwork and stubbornness to fight back. We left the meeting without agreeing to anything. Outside, Hank called me. I told him what happened. He said, "Now you'll see their next move." 2 mornings later, I arrived and found the gravel lane blocked by a brand new chain and a no trespassing sign. The chain was attached to posts that hadn't been there before. For a moment, I just stared, stunned by the boldness. Then anger lit up in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an attempt to physically cut me off from my property. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I also called my attorney. While I waited, Karen's SUV rolled up on the other side like she'd been expecting me. She stepped out smiling. "Access is closed," she said. "Community decision." I held up my phone. "Say that again for the recording." The deputy was calm, professional, and clearly tired of nonsense. He asked who installed the chain. Karen said, "The HOA did. This is a private community road." My attorney arrived and handed the deputy the easement paperwork and survey. The deputy read it, then looked at Karen. "Ma'am, this owner has legal access," he said. Karen protested, "But we maintain it." The deputy replied, "Maintenance doesn't cancel an easement." He told her to remove the chain or face consequences. Karen's smile cracked. She muttered something about appeals and board authority, but she unlocked it. As I drove through, I caught her glare in my mirror, pure, burning hatred. After that, the HOA couldn't win on paper, so they tried to win socially. I started hearing things. That I was building a commercial venue. That I was bringing outsiders. That I was destroying a historical site. That I was stealing community. Land. People I'd never met. Posted online about protecting Pine Ridge. Few even drove by slowly, filming on their phones. I won't lie, some nights it made me feel exposed. But then I'd step into the cabin, touch the old beams, and remember why I started. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was restoring what everyone else had abandoned. If they wanted a villain, they picked the wrong person. Instead of hiding, I documented everything. I started posting updates, permits, restoration steps, historical facts, before and after photos. Nothing insulting, nothing petty. Just clear information. I even posted the survey boundary map with sensitive details blurred. "This is privately owned land," I wrote. "Please respect it." The response surprised me. People outside Pine Ridge were supportive local history lovers, restoration fans, neighbors who were tired of HOA bullying. Even a few Pine Ridge residents messaged quietly, "We don't agree with Karen, but we're scared to say it." That told me something important. Karen didn't represent everyone. She just acted like she did. Midway through restoration, we hit a real problem that had nothing to do with the HOA. The old well area started sinking slightly after heavy rain. A contractor warned me it could become a sinkhole if we ignored drainage. For a week, everything paused while we brought in specialists. We reinforced the area, redirected runoff, and sealed what needed sealing. It cost money I hadn't planned to spend. Stress piled up. Karen's letters kept coming in the background, like mosquitoes. One night I sat on the porch steps and thought, maybe this is too much. Then I remembered the diary line. If we leave, they'll take it. And I stood back up. When the new roof was finished and the exterior was cleaned, the cabin changed personality. It stopped looking like a ruin and started looking like a home that had simply been asleep. We restored the front porch posts, using wood that matched the original style. We repaired the stone chimney, carefully remortaring the gaps. One afternoon, I stepped back and saw it, sunlight on fresh wood, the outline of the cabin sharp against green trees. I felt something like pride and relief at the same time. Then I heard a car door slam on the road. Karen had arrived again, as if she sensed joy and came to suffocate it. She marched up holding a new stack of papers. "Stop work immediately," she announced. "This structure is historically protected and cannot be altered without community approval." I asked, "Which agency declared it protected?" She hesitated. "It's recognized by the community." I almost laughed. I said, "Community recognition isn't a legal designation." She jabbed a finger toward the porch. "You changed the posts." I replied, "I replaced rotted supports so the roof wouldn't collapse." Karen's voice went icy. "You don't understand," she said. "This cabin is ours. It belongs to everyone here." I said, "Then why did everyone let it rot?" This time, it wasn't just HOA stationery. It came from an actual law firm representing Pine Ridge. The letter claimed the HOA had a prescriptive right, due to long-term use of the cabin area for recreation, and that I was interfering with established community access. My attorney read it and sighed. "They're trying a legal angle," he said. "Still weak, but we must respond carefully." The plan was simple. We'd send back the survey, deed, easement, and evidence that any public use was never formally granted, just tolerated during abandonment. Tolerated doesn't mean donated. And if they wanted to fight, we'd be ready. A woman named Denise emailed me privately. She lived in Pine Ridge and said she'd watched Karen bully people for years. Denise wrote, "The board is scared of her because she's loud and relentless. But not everyone agrees. She's obsessed with that cabin because she tells people she saved it by keeping it off the market." Denise offered something huge. Screenshots of HOA group posts where Karen openly admitted they had no deed, but wanted to claim it by use and pressure the owner until he gives up. That wasn't just petty talk, that was evidence of intent. My attorney nearly laughed when he saw it. "This helps," he said. "A lot. We agreed to mediation to avoid a drawn-out court battle. In a bland office conference room, Karen showed up with the HOA president and their lawyer. My attorney and I sat across with documents neatly organized. The mediator asked what the HOA wanted. Karen answered without hesitation. We want continued public access and veto rights over alterations. The cabin is part of Pine Ridge. My attorney replied, you want control of property you don't own. Karen leaned forward. We effectively own it, she said. We've used it for years. The mediator asked, did the prior owner grant permission in writing? Silence. Karen's jaw tightened. In that silence, her whole argument deflated. The mediator looked at Karen and said, calmly, why didn't the HOA buy it when it was available? Karen snapped. We shouldn't have to pay for what's already ours. My attorney gently slid the deed across the table. It's not yours, he said. This is ownership. Karen's lawyer tried to pivot toward nuisance and neighborhood impact. My attorney countered with permits, inspection reports, and quiet hour commitments. The mediator leaned back and said, it appears the HOA is attempting to obtain rights without compensation. Karen muttered, it's not about money. Denise's screenshots suggested otherwise. It was about control. Always control. Within 2 weeks, the HOA's lawyer sent a much softer letter. No more big claims. No more common land. They requested a mutual agreement about signage and limited trail access. My attorney advised against giving them anything that looked like permission. It could become leverage later. Instead, we offered a simple neighborly compromise. I would post no trespassing signs and also create a small viewing spot near the road where people could read about the cabin's history without entering the property. Information, not access. The HOA rejected it. Karen insisted on control. And that stubbornness backfired. Because my attorney prepared a response that hit hard. We would seek damages for harassment if it continued. Karen's last big move was reporting Emmy to the county for illegal logging. The truth? We removed 2 dead trees leaned toward the cabin documented, permitted, and done by a certified arborist. The county inspector arrived, reviewed the permit, and looked annoyed. You're fine, he said, then added, this keeps happening with your address. I nodded. He paused and said quietly, if they keep filing false complaints, the county can address that. That was the first time I realized Karen's tactics could start hurting her instead. There's a line between being difficult and being abusive. She crossed it so many times she stopped seeing it. With the legal noise fading, I focused on what mattered. We restored the fireplace with a hidden steel liner for safety while keeping the original stone face. In the kitchen area, we preserved the old footprint, building cabinets that matched the cabin's era simple, sturdy, honest. We installed modern plumbing carefully, hidden where possible, so the cabin could function without losing its soul. I kept the blue flower wallpaper pattern as an accent behind open shelves, sealing it to preserve what remained. Each choice felt like a conversation with the past. I see you. I'm not erasing you. I'm continuing you. And for the first time in months, I worked without flinching at every car sound on the road. I finally sat down and read more of the old notebook. It mentioned the dispute neighbors trying to claim the spring water, then trying to claim the orchard. One line stood out. They want what we built, but not the work. I stared at those words until my eyes stung. That was exactly what was happening again, just dressed up in modern HOA language. The writer wasn't famous. The family wasn't wealthy. But they understood human nature perfectly. People will call something community when they mean convenient. They'll call it heritage when they mean status. That diary didn't just tell history. It warned the future. And somehow, it had landed in my hands. My attorney sent a formal demand letter. Stop harassment. Stop false reports. Stop trespass attempts. Stop interfering with the easement. It included evidence, screenshots, incident dates, sheriff documentation, and the survey. It also offered one final boundary. Any Pine Ridge resident entering my property would be considered trespassing, and we would press charges if necessary. It wasn't aggressive. It was firm. A line in the sand. 2 days after the letter arrived, Karen showed up again. But this time, she didn't get out of her SUV. She sat there for a minute, staring at the cabin, and drove away. That was the first time she retreated. The first night the electrical system went live, I stayed until dusk. As the sun dropped behind the ridge, I flipped a switch and watched warm light fill the cabin through restored windows. For a second, it looked like the old photos, like the family might walk in carrying firewood and laughter. I stood outside and just watched it glow. That glow wasn't just electricity. It was proof. Proof that abandonment wasn't the final chapter. Proof that intimidation didn't win. Proof that history didn't belong to the loudest person. It belonged to whoever was willing to show up and do the work. Somewhere down the hill, I saw a car slow near the road. It didn't stop. It just kept going. A month later, the HOA board sent a short letter. They would cease involvement regarding the cabin parcel and acknowledged it was privately owned. No apology. No explanation. Just a retreat in plain language. Karen's name wasn't signed, but I knew she'd fought it. She'd probably told herself she was still right, still the hero of her own story. But reality doesn't care about ego. The deed was the deed. The survey was the survey. And the cabin was mine. After months of stress, that letter felt like exhaling after holding my breath underwater. I pinned a copy inside my restoration binder, not out of spite, but as a reminder, paper matters. Even though I didn't owe Pine Ridge anything, I didn't want to be bitter. I built a small pull-off near the easement area, still on my property, clearly marked with a simple sign. Mercer Cabin, built circa 1870s, privately owned. Please respect boundaries. Under it, I placed a weatherproof display with a few historical photos and a short written history, no drama. No HOA mention, just facts. People could appreciate the place without invading it. Hank told me later he saw a family reading it quietly, then leaving. That's how it should be, he said. And he was right. Appreciation doesn't require entitlement. On the 1-year anniversary of buying it, I sat on the restored porch with a mug of coffee and watched fog lift off the creek. The orchard had been pruned and was blooming again. The barn frame stood stabilized, waiting for its next phase. The cabin wasn't perfect, and I liked that. It looked honest, lived in, earned. I thought about Karen's words. It's ours. I finally understood why they made me so angry. Because ours can be beautiful when it means community and care. But when someone uses ours to steal, to control, to bully, that isn't community. That's greed wearing a friendly mask. The cabin taught me something simple. Ownership is paper, but home is work and courage.